Title: The Sound Beneath. It started innocently enough. Sarah had just moved into the small, old house at the end of Elm Street, a bargain compared to others nearby. The locals whispered about the place, claiming it held secrets, but Sarah was only focused on renovating the charming little abode. A thrift store find, an old cassette player, became her companion through the endless chores. She loved the crackle and hiss of the tapes rolling, bringing a vintage touch to her new life. One evening, as she perused a box of items left behind by the previous owner, she found a dusty cassette labeled "Forgotten Recordings." Intrigued, she brushed away the grime and slipped it into the cassette player. Eagerly, she pressed play. At first, an eerie silence filled the room, a void that made her chuckle nervously, thinking the tape was blank. Suddenly, crackling voices broke through. The whispers, indistinct yet urgent, sent a shiver down her spine. She leaned closer, straining to make sense of the distortion. "They're coming," one voice warned, chilling her to the bone. Another voice followed, low and gravelly, "You can't escape." Glimpses of laughter emerged, twisted and mocking, sending little pricks of fear through her. Sarah felt her heart race. Was it her imagination, or did she hear a faint echoing call of her name within that cacophony? The sound vibrated through the walls, feeling oddly familiar yet completely foreign. Shaking her head, Sarah turned off the player, but the whispers clung to her, weaving in and out of her thoughts. That night, sleep evaded her. Every sound, creaking floors, the wind whistling through the cracks, became a dinner invitation for paranoia. Each time she closed her eyes, the sinister voices returned, circling menace around her like vultures. Days passed, and Sarah found herself replaying the cassette, drawn to its sinister allure. The whispers spoke of events long unsaid: death, disappearances, fights, tragedy. Each time, one particular phrase echoed loudest: "We are never alone." Each line seemed woven tightly with a thread of dread, and she couldn't help but feel as though they were speaking directly to her. Determined to solve the mystery, she researched the old house and discovered its haunting past. It had been a gathering point for a cult that mysteriously vanished over 2 decades ago. The townspeople murmured about rituals held in the dead of night, peculiar sounds echoing from the woods nearby. But what held her still was the rumor that those who dared trespass into their domain were doomed to join their ranks, eternally trapped where they did not belong. With a mix of fear and curiosity, Sarah planned to venture into the woods, convinced that the key to the whispering voices lay there. Dusk fell, and she felt a thrill of adrenaline rush through her. The trees loomed dark and twisted, shadows dancing as the wind rustled around her. Each step felt heavier, reluctant, as if something was pulling at her very essence. Reaching a clearing, she stumbled upon an unmarked grave adorned with wilting flowers. Drawing closer, her breath caught in her throat as the whispers grew louder, singing around her like a haunting lullaby. Suddenly, she felt a cold breeze wash over her, and just like that, she was no longer alone. Figures began to emerge, ghostly silhouettes, faces twisted in eternal anguish. They surrounded her, their voices intertwining into an agonizing choir. "Join us, join us." The weight of despair enveloped her, pulling her toward the grave. Fear surged through Sarah. She turned to flee, but the ground beneath her shifted as unseen hands gripped her ankles, dragging her toward the remnants of the cult's fate. She screamed, the sound lost to the howling wind. Trapped in that moment, she remembered the cassette. Frantically, she scrambled through her bag, retrieving the player from beneath her arm, praying to find solace within the old cassette. She pressed play, the familiar crackling filling the air. There were no comforting tones this time. It was a cacophony of desperation, chanting to her endlessly. The once familiar whispers turned malevolent, echoing her name with haunting urgency, beckoning her deeper into the darkness. "Forever yours," it hissed, as shadows merged together, enveloping her completely. Back at the house, as the sun rose the next morning, the tape continued playing alone, an eerie silence soon filling the room. The cassette player remained plugged into the wall, the label on the cassette glowing faintly, "Forgotten Recordings." And just beyond the door, the shadows breathed, whispering secrets, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon their dark serenade. In deserted streets, the house stood, wearing its eerie charm with pride, and the whispers continued, ever hungry for new echoes of fear.